Cairngorm, Glencoe, and Lockheed have been independent teams since 2016. So has the Tayside team. However, they have rejoined Scottish Mountain Rescue as a sort of umbrella organisation in 2021. So that's just something to be aware of when we talk about the statistics, that there are obviously some significant areas where we currently don't get stats about all the incidents. However, some of the fatality data which Ross mentioned should include these because they come from Police Scotland directly. All the data that I'm going to be talking about tonight is also usually published in the annual statistics reports that Scottish Mountain Rescue has on their website. The reports go back as far back as 2011, and that includes data going back as far as 2001, which can be quite an interesting read. Having said that, obviously some of the way that this data has been recorded or how the statistics are being prepared has evolved over the years with various people. Hence they might not always be one-to-one comparable. However, the process of compiling them has been pretty stable over the last 6 or 7 years or so, and the membership has also been pretty stable, with the exceptions that I've mentioned just then. So much about the data sets that we've got available to analyze. You will also be the first ones to hear about the 2023 statistics. They're currently not yet published, so some of the stuff I'll be talking about tonight is, so to say, hot off the press. So how are these statistics recorded then? Scottish Mountain Rescue maintains an online database for team leaders, where team leaders log on to enter information about the incidents that their teams have attended, the casualties that they've treated, the injuries that those casualties might have had, as well as those incidents occurring. And it's important to know that this only includes formal mountain rescue incidents. So what does that mean? Only incidents where a 999 call was usually placed, that then gets assigned to the police, who pass it on to the civilian mountain rescue teams. Those get logged in the database. What we don't tend to log is, for example, if a team member happens to meet a member of the public on a hill who is underprepared and requires a little bit of help coming down the hill, these kind of good Samaritan acts wouldn't usually go into the official stats. And then depending on the team, because life isn't quite perfect, team leaders might enter that data either very soon after the fallout having happened, or at some point after the fallout, which could be as late as the following January. So as you can see, that might already lead to some inaccuracies in what we may or may not know about mountain rescue fallouts. But Ross, many incident reports yourself. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what challenges we might find with mountain rescue statistics.
Yeah, because they don't want just anyone in every single mountain rescue team filling it in, because the way you interpret some of the questions and therefore the data you put in, it wants to be quite similar across. So they don't want lots of people within the same team being able to fill out the data. So it usually falls to the team leader or one other member of the team. So if, for instance, Arica Mountain Rescue Team have a call out and I wasn't there as team leader because I was on holiday or at work, then at some point down the line, I then need to collect that information because I wasn't there. So I need to find out where they were, whether they were male or female, and all those other things like that, and what we think might have caused the incident. And then at some point, I need to put that data in, and obviously it becomes second or third hand as well. It's the longer it takes to fill it in, as in the longer the time lapse, and more people that information's being handed in, the less accurate that's inevitably going to be. So there are problems with it, and we just need to be aware of that when Jeff starts showing us it. So it all needs to be taken with a little bit of pinch of salt, because it's only as good as the information that's been put in. There's no real way around it, because we're all volunteers, and if you make it too onerous, because there's loads of questions you'd want the data to ask or to be put in, but if you make it too onerous on the team leaders and people who are all volunteers put in, then it probably won't get done. So it's that striking the balance of asking enough questions to put in the data versus how long it would take to do. So it is a bit of a pain, and some teams are very good at it and will do it straight after an event. And as Jess intimated earlier on, some teams will take 12 months and do all of them at the end of the year when Jess starts sending nasty emails saying, "Where's my statistics?" But that's her problem, not mine.
Only ever send friendly emails. But another thing that you obviously also have to bear in mind is that we're dealing often with medical casualties encounter, and although we want to report as much as possible about what's happened, we also need to be careful to obviously not to collect too much personal data about these individuals, because as much as possible we want to keep personally identifiable information out of our databases, for obvious reasons. So now that you know a little bit more about where these stats come from and how we collect the data, you're going to see a few slides with nice graphs, hopefully. So first of all, I wanted to talk a little bit about the long-term trends in terms of call-outs. So here you can see the number of call-outs since 2005 up to 2023 in red, and in blue against the right axis, the number of hours that volunteer mountain rescue teams have spent tending these call-outs since then. And as you can see, there has been sort of a steady upwards trend with some occasional annual drops. The stats started around about 370 or so, just over 700 for a year. And just to explain a little bit what that means when I talk about, so an incident, think of that as someone or a group of people needing assistance or rescue in the mountains, or maybe not having turned up at the end of the day. So that would be an individual incident that the police records, and that might trigger one or multiple call-outs. For example, there might just be one team going out to help someone who's a bit lost, or if they're not quite sure where they are and there is someone with a dog in that team, they might take their dog handler with them as well, and then their search and rescue dog can also have a look for that missing person or for that lost individual. There are also drone pilots now volunteering with many of the teams. So again, that might go down as a separate call out. Both the mountain rescue team and the drone pilot are activated at the same time. And we also have occasional instances of larger searches where maybe a lot of ground needs to be covered, or searches can take multiple days. That might mean then that for a single incident, or an incident can trigger multiple call-outs. So that's just something to bear in mind when I talk about call-outs versus incidents. Also, it's worth knowing that not all incidents that mountain rescue teams respond to are inherently mountaineering related, because teams support many other search and rescue activities in remote areas. So, for example, missing person searches in remote and rural areas, water-based rescues as well in some instances, as well as, for example, in the borders, you get quite a lot of mountain bike accidents as well. So whenever there's someone who isn't able to self-evacuate in an area that's tricky to access for an ambulance, let's say, then a mountain rescue team might be asked to help to get them to safety. Yeah, you might notice here quite a spike. So we saw a drop in fallouts and hours volunteered in 2020 because of lockdowns and less people going out in the hills and so on. And then in 2021, which is at least partially associated as well with rejoining SMR, because they cover quite a lot, quite a large area, quite a large high number of fallouts every year. So that gives you an overview of sort of what member teams are up to overall and the trend. But the thing that I thought is maybe more relevant to you is related to the mountaineering incidents. So here you can see over the last 5 years the sort of split of various mountaineering activities that led to incidents, and to give you an idea of what are the incidents, what are the activities that cause incidents. And you can see there's a reasonably stable trend here, a very large proportion of hill walking, both summer and winter related hill walking incidents, with winter starting to increase in its proportion. But you can also see that sort of technical mountaineering activities like scrambling, rock climbing, winter climbing, more proportion of mountain rescue incidents, and stable as well over the years. And the other thing that we looked at the overall fallout figures, there was quite a dip in 2020. The number of mountaineering incidents still went up, but it has since decreased a little bit since the peak in 2021. So one thing I understand we were quite interested to know more about are the factors associated and leading to incidents. So when the team leaders report their fallout statistics, they can select, think between 20 to 30 different factors in their data, and each incident can be related to multiple factors, as well as the ability to insert sort of other described factors. And you can see here there's some quite stable trends. So a large portion of slips and trips causing incidents, as well as some falls, and reported missing or have reduced since the early 2000s. So that could be related to software on their phones, means that they can relocate themselves more easily if they get lost, and at the same time having access to mobile phones and better signal coverage also obviously allows them to communicate with their relatives and friends whereabouts they are, if they're going to be delayed, and so on and so forth. At the same time, contrary to what one may believe, technology reliance, it has been a sort of small contributor to call-outs, but it hasn't been necessarily increasing or a huge factor in recent years. When I compared this data to longer-term stats, so previous years that aren't included in this chart, there seemed to be a slight upwards trend in slips and trips, probably by around 5%. But yeah, obviously we don't really know why that's the case. And the other thing that is also noticeable here is that there was an increase in that year in navigation errors. And I guess one could hypothesize that that could have been related to less experienced people suddenly going out in the hills of Scotland because they have to take a holiday in their home country rather than being able to go abroad and so on. But yeah, I think the long-term trends that we can take away from here is there are lots of slips and trips, some falls from heights, although a much smaller proportion, and then quite a few lost people as well, that can often, to be fair, be helped by just locating them on their phone and then giving them instructions on how to get back on the path. The other two charts you can see here on the right then talk about the weather conditions and ground conditions that have been associated with the incidents. So again, recorded by the team leaders and to be taken with a pinch of salt, because obviously what conditions may have been encountered wherever the casualty and whenever they were found may not necessarily have been the conditions where they had the accident that led them to trigger the call. Contrary to what one might think, actually, the majority good or not too bad weather. Of course, could get dark if you're stuck on a mountain and waiting for rescue. But that might just be showing a correlation with the fact that obviously the better the weather is, the more likely we're going to see large numbers of people out on the hill. And then on the bottom here, you can see that roughly just over 20% of people actually have accidents or need assistance either on or very close to paths. But other ground conditions such as grass and heather also feature prominently. There's steep terrain over 30 degrees was only reported against 14% of incidents over the last 5 years. And then lastly, I also want to talk a little bit about the types of injuries and injury occasions that we see recorded against the casualty. That 50% here are suspected fractures, followed then by sprains, cuts, and bruises. Lower leg injuries and ankle injuries. So people who obviously cannot self-evacuate at that point if they've got a lower leg or ankle fracture. Whereas you can see that arm, wrist, and hand injuries are much less prominent at 5%. And we may just not know about a lot of them because we don't know how many of those casualties, if they're sort of walking wounded, can still make it down the hill before seeking medical help, which would obviously be a lot quicker for them than waiting for a rescue team to come to their help. But yeah, probably the takeaway from this slide is the majority of what we deal with are lower leg ankle fractures and sprains, and fatalities with 5% make up a relatively small percentage of mountain rescue incidents. And in fact, this wouldn't be included in the mountaineering related statistics, but probably the large and deceased casualties are more related to suicide rather to mountaineering activities.
Yeah, so just from team leaders' point of view, and if people have got any medical backgrounds, sort of differentiating between a sprain on the hill and a fracture on the hill of an ankle, for instance, is almost impossible. So it's interesting to differentiate between the two, and most of that will be guesswork. So if you put the two together, sprains and fractures, it brings it to 64%. And then if you take ankle, lower leg, and knees, then it's 66%. So, and then if you take it back to the slide before, that it's happening mostly on paths, tracks, and grassy slope, then actually most of it's people walking along and just going over on an ankle or over on their leg, and then going, oh, I can't self-evacuate, I need to get off the hill. So we often think of people needing rescuing as these big events and all very complicated, and they've made these awful mistakes. But actually, statistically, most people are just having these slight kind of mishaps with their feet near a path, and it's not these big events. They're not doing things majorly wrong. They're just having a little kind of a slip or rolling their ankle and then not being able to get off the hill. Is my take from all that. Would you agree, Jess?
Yeah, definitely. And I think we see that as well when we look at the fall versus slip and trip statistics. So a fall would be defined as someone falling from a certain height, i.e. off something, off a boat, whereas the slip and trip to someone, as you say, going over on the ankle. I can't vouch for how consistently that is always distinguished when people fill in the stats. Certainly that's the guidance that we would give. But falls are a lot less common. And I guess the other thing that also that can happen is sometimes these stats are filled in with the information that the police passes over when the 999 call happens. And that can be self-reported by a casualty that at that point is in quite a lot of distress. So they might not always necessarily relay accurate information for someone who's just slid 10 meters that might feel like they've slid a lot further. And hence what might look like a fall in the stats might have actually been something less severe, which is quite difficult to establish, right? Cool. I think then summarizing what we can learn, a couple of points for me. Although the call-out stats have almost doubled since 2005, we've seen a slight decrease in mountain-related incidents since the peak in 2021. And Ross kindly forwarded me a report from, I think, the late 80s, where someone had mountain rescue stats back then, probably lot that more arduously than we can do today. And certainly reading through that was quite sobering, because I think there, in some instances, up to a quarter of the call-outs, fifth to a quarter of the call-outs they had attended were fatalities that we deal with is considerably less. But the caveat is that the SMR stats also only tell us when things have gone wrong, and we don't understand really how this correlates to what people are doing in the missions. So anecdotally, it sounds like the great outdoors are more accessible and popular than ever. And I guess there's almost been a trend in recent years to outdoors and post lots of awesome pictures on Instagram. So that might also contribute to the fact that there's simply more people out in the mountains, and hence more incidents are happening. Another factor or another hypothesis, I guess, one have is that people are spending more time online, and there are lots of great websites out there getting ideas about where they can go and how to get there. It might not always be easy for inexperienced people to judge how difficult it be, especially if you maybe go more on social media rather than proper that are about hill walking. You may see lots of awesome pictures. You don't really know what the conditions were like, and what it might look like day out. One person could be quite an epic one, someone else. So all these things could obviously contribute to the numbers increase. But I don't know, Ross, if you wanted to comment on the other 2 points coming from your leader perspective.
So the third bullet point there is now easier than 20 years ago. So I'm in my early 40s, so I started the hills and having adventures in my late teens, early 20s. So that was pre kind of good mobile phone signal, and certainly before kind of smartphones and GPS were kind of carried by everyone. So I wonder I suppose the question is, well, it is easier to call out mountain rescue because there are waves of places in Scotland which feel very remote, but actually you've got good signal. You can certainly send a text message and ask for help. So are people calling out mountain rescue sooner rather than later, which as Jess was talking about the old SMR statistics from the 80s, mountain rescue teams being to casualties before they're dying, which is a great thing. But that we're now having to rescue more people because people are asking for help sooner. So it's a double-edged sword. The statistics have gone up, we're busier, but the outcomes are better. So And even with the phones, what we can do now, and this has happened in the last 5 years, is because most people's mobile phones have got a GPS. If they've got signal, the mountain rescue team can send them a text message called Phone Find through a system called Phone Find, and it gives them a text message. It basically says, do you want to be found? If you do, press this link. So they press the link on their screen on their smartphone. Within seconds, on the screen back at base on my computer, it will give me a 10-figure group reference, and also it will put that position on a map for me, and then I can just send team members up to go and find them. So 10 years ago, if someone was lost, if you know the area around us, Ben Eam and Ben Narnain and places like that, there's a bit of a flat area in the middle, and there's 3 or 4 options. If people are lost in the mist, they've gone up the cobbler, they've come down to Bealach-a-Vane, which is a sort of flat area, and they've got a bit lost. If they're lost and have kind of phoned in for help, for the technology, we'd have to send team members up from about 4 or 5 different locations in the area, just in case someone had gone down the wrong valley. Now we send them this text message. Within seconds, we know where they are. That will allow us to either say, stay where you are, we'll come and get you. Or some teams have been doing it where they say, you're standing next to a stream, follow the stream downhill, and every 20 minutes, I'll send you another text message. If you just press the link, I'll be able to watch on my screen walking down the hill, which just means you don't have to then deploy. So the kind of the statistics around time spent searching has just dropped significantly for those where people are just a little bit disorientated, but not unwell. So they can almost self-rescue just by us saying, yeah, you're in the right direction going. The other thing, we've got our satellite communications now coming online. A change in the law a few years ago where EPIRB, emergency positioning indicator radio beacon, if you want the thing, or personal location beacons, used to be only allowed to be used legally at sea. We can now use GPS, satellite stuff, locationing on land, and that was changed. So there are more and more incidents now getting called out, not by mobile phone, by kind of personal location beacons and spots and inReaches, and they're now starting to allow two-way communications. So you can follow people online. Someone's going on a big adventure, you can follow the spot. I'm sure a lot of your members might have done that for races, following their friends or doing things like that. And you can also send a text message through that as well. And the new thing that's happened in the last year or two is the most modern smart. So I think it's the iPhone 15, and then some Android phones can have emergency text messages through the satellites through your own mobile phone. So the technology for and asking for help is just rapidly increasing. The area it's covering is increasing, which means hopefully we get to more people, but we're also getting to people before come and end up being a fatality. And the other thing about the statistics about identifying accident black spots is difficult, because when we record the statistics, it only gives us space for a six-figure reference. So that's 100 meter by 100 meter square on the map, rather than a kind of grid reference, which would be a 1 meter by 1 meter. But it also is that we've been asked to record that for where we find the casualty, not. So if we're at the bottom of the cliff, we have to identify that as the bottom of the cliff, not the top of the cliff where they fell off, for instance. Top of the hill and they've wandered into a valley, we record where we found them, which is in the valley, not lost the hill. So it's quite tricky to record incident black spots, because people start and it's 100 meter by 100 meter square rather than a 1 meter by 1 meter square. That's me on that slide.
Fantastic, thanks, Bob.
So this slide is, you're going to change voice a little bit, so it's going to be me that starts taking a little bit, and Jess is going to add bits at the end. So back in 2013, Heather Morning, my predecessor, who is in Bay area, she was the mountain safety advisor for Mountaineering Scotland, and she started collecting the fatalities. Now, this is a bit more specific to the SMR statistics, because It doesn't rely on teams reporting it. It doesn't rely on mountain rescue teams being a member of Scottish Mountain Rescue SMR or not. This comes from the police, and it's just to do with fatalities happened in the mountains when we're talking about things that we would consider to be hill walking, climbing, mountaineering, ski touring, so kind of the recreational. There have been, and you'll see later on, there have been a few incidents where suicides have been recorded, but recently they've only for 2 years, so we've taken those out because they're not kind of mountaineering related things. I think they fit well with that. What is, I've taken everything up to 2023. Now, I haven't quite finalized the 20 statistics for this, but it's pretty close to it. As I said, it'll be different to the SMR. So 5%, I think SMR said 5% fatalities. And if you took their overall number and then worked it backwards, you'd probably get a little bit of a different picture. And that's just because of what we're looking at specifically, whereas SMR will take fatalities around kind of metals and things like that. And Police Scotland will also have their own numbers and slightly different because they'll be again recording any death in the mountain, any fatality, and we don't include sort of things. Also, I have to make decision on what is that. So if someone parks their car, walker parks their car at the Cairngorm ski area for 150 meters and goes for a little walk and then has a heart attack, a dog, and they're 200, 300 meters away from the car park, in a way they're in mountain area. They're quite high. They're at sort of 700 meters. But will I class them as doing a mountaineering, hill walking activity? Probably not. So there's still absolutely some judgment that's been going on with these statistics. They died in the mountains because in some areas, a hill or a mountain is different to Glencoe compared to the Borders, for instance. So I still have some judgment called on that. And well, yeah, that's just tough. These are numbers that we're doing for that. It's becoming more difficult to collect this information because the police and other organisations are more aware of data and personal information. So they are getting richer about giving another agency like Mountaineering Scotland this information. So Heather was very good at kind of speaking to the police and rescue teams and kind of getting the background story, who it was, names, and to what they think and the stories that led up to the incident. That definitely happened from the police now, because when I speak to the police, they're much more professional about what they're sharing, and rightly so. So I don't get to know names. I do ask for any kind of identifying information. They don't give me because they don't want to give it. They're legally not wanting to give it, and that's okay. We've got to play the game. But it does mean I can't kind of delve much deeper than the numbers themselves anymore, because it's the information about why they fell off, who they were with, what they were up to at the time, anything that they think might identify that person at that time, at that location, they don't want to give me. And for the purposes of presenting here, what I've done is I've pulled them all together. So we're not year on year, we're going to look at, or location, we're going to look at the general since 2013 to 2023. So that's sort of 10 or 11 years. Next slide, please.
Yeah. So here you can see the causes that have been established with the mountaineering fatality data and the donut. And I kind of put that side by side with this Scott showed you earlier about the SMR mountaineering incidents. And I guess the main thing to note is that there's in the SMR incident data, summer hill walking made up 65% or so every year. Actually falls in summer only 26% of fatalities that were recorded, whereas we're at 24%. and then avalanches and hypothermia, which again we might mostly sort of into mountaineering, another 10% each. So if you take that together between the winter falls, avalanches, and hypothermia, then you've got 44% of fatalities causes. So yeah, it's quite a different picture about what people were up to when they either required a mountain rescue call out versus when fatalities happened. And the other sort of chart to compare the SMR data with the Mountaineering Scotland fatality data I wanted to look at was about demographics. Surprising stat for me as well was the gender split. Almost 50-50 split, with 45% being female and 50% being males of the casualties requiring rescue. Whereas in the fatality data, there were only 8% females and 92% of males. Likewise, looking at the age distribution of casualties in SMR data and fatalities, it looks don't line up perfectly. But what you can see in the SMR incidents is that there is a definite skew towards younger age groups, so the 17 to 25 and 26 to 35 years, at least where the casualties had their age recorded. Whereas in the Mountaineering Scotland fatalities, there's a sort of 27 to 38-year-old, there's a little peak. Then the highest number of fatalities, just over 40, actually occurred in the 49 to 60-year-old age bracket.
Yeah, how we look at that and try and explain that away, we don't know. Hopefully, some of your audience will be able to help me with that. But some questions is that age group sort of 50 to 60 because maybe they've had children or concentrated on the career and they get to sort of 50, 60 and they're kind of happier and they're getting more free time and they come back to mountaineering and climbing and walking and everything. So they've had this kind of time out and they go back and maybe they, how do I put this gently? They still think of themselves as 20-year-olds. So they go out and have adventures thinking their body and their brain are going to work like they did when they were 20, and then their brain and body don't quite match their expectation. I certainly feel that sometimes with myself. And also, you've got the medical issues coming into play there as well. So there's as you see in the next slide, there's a difference. What I did is I split what we call and medical. It's a bit tricky because we don't know if someone falls off something and then dies, did they fall off because they were doing something technical and they just fell off, or did they have a stroke or a heart attack that then means they went there? And without going a lot of detail and going into people's medical records, which I'm not able to do, then I have to again assumptions about what that was. So there might be some skewing of the things, because if someone aged 65 falls off a mountain, I don't know why they fell off the mountain. I've put that down as trauma because it was the trauma that killed them rather than the medical issue, but that might be the cause of the trauma instance. That makes sense. But as we can see, the average age of a medical fatality is 61.5 years old, which kind of makes sense. The average age of a trauma fatality, so that's sort of getting hit, broken, and some sort of way, then that's 45.2 years old. So anyone who's caught in an avalanche will be trauma, rockfall, falling off, falling into things, that sort of things, or being hit by rockfall. Whereas if they sat down and then they were found to be dead, but there was no kind of trauma involved, then I've put that down as a medical thing. So hypothermia, just for reference, I've put down as a trauma, which medically probably isn't quite right, but for the cases of this, wasn't something that happened with their body that failed them. It was something external. There's a bit of a difference between men and women in this, male and female. So age 50 and 50.5 for men, 41 significant thing. I was teasing Jess earlier on because she was stereotyping that males are much more safety conscious because they're wearing a helmet. The picture she's put on there, the female's wearing a helmet and has her ice axe in her hand the right way around almost, whereas the man has got his woolly hat and not ready to do an ice axe rest at all. So that's Jess's interpretation of maybe why males die more and at an older age than females. But again, the kind of the future question is drilling down a little bit more in what there is that difference. So I need to split out trauma and split out the medical between male and female as well. I haven't done that yet, but is there a big difference with when you look at just the medical and just the trauma between the male and female as well? That's a question for later on. Jess, do you have anything to add on?
Well, the only thing I have to add is that it's a brilliant example of how AI can reinforce gender stereotypes, because I must admit, I asked Sally to draw me a picture of a female and a male mountaineer, and it wasn't me who came to the woolly hat versus helmet.
Oh, all right, so that's AI-generated stereotypes of male and female mountaineers, is it?
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Maybe you could do a presentation on that at some point.
Maybe for next year. I think in terms of key takeaways, so this is going to be the end of the look at the stats. Maybe unsurprisingly, falls lead to more fatalities than summer falls, because you're probably going to slide a bit further in winter when it's nice and slippery and icy out there. And because of the temperatures, winter and obviously the avalanche risk, winter introduces significant risks that lead to fatalities. Maybe a bit surprisingly, considering that we now see more and more women doing similar things in the mountains to men. There's, in terms of fatalities, quite a stark difference between the different genders. And the other interesting point there was about the age distribution, showing that life experience does not always lead to safe outcomes. And I think this is a very compared to hand fully over to you, Ross, and you can maybe a bit more about why that might be the case, and then move on to how these escape in the mountains.
Yeah, so we're kind of entering the next phase just of time as well. We're kind of moving time-wise quite quickly. So there's bias. So this is I'm going to explain what these mean, and then we're going to move on and use those to try and explain why and what we can do about that, so we can hopefully be safer in the mountains. So confirmation bias is a tendency to give precedence to information that reinforce what they believe or want to believe to be true. So we don't like changing our worldview. So what we do is, if we're presented with 2 or 3 bits of information, we choose it or manipulate information to confirm our existing beliefs rather than change our existing beliefs to fit that. That's confirmation bias. Illusion of control is when an individual believes they can control uncontrollables. They underestimate the risks, and this often leads them to strategies. So going into avalanche terrain and thinking, well, I've done an avalanche course and I'll be able to control it and do all that. And having that belief will also, when things start going wrong, they will then start ignoring the fact it's going wrong, because they're like, well, no, I'm good with this. This is the strategy, and that failing, we'll keep with the strategy. And then there's normalization of deviance, just a posh way of doing something you know to be wrong enough times that it becomes more an accepted practice. So, for instance, not carrying a first aid kit, not carrying a head torch, that first few times you're like, oh, I should remember it. And then gradually it just becomes normal that you don't carry a head torch or a first aid kit, or that you're traveling in considerable avalanche terrain. But I've walked down a slope here before. It's considerable, but I've been walking down slopes that have been forecasted to be considerable. Nothing's ever happened, and all that's doing is reinforcing each time that what you're doing, you know, to be wrong. That gradually you change your perception, and it becomes, you can stop thinking about it. Another example from everyday life is, we'll all know, driving down the motorway, the speed limit is 70. That's the law, but the average speed down most motorways is probably about 80 miles an hour, if we're going to be honest. And because everyone else is doing it, and we've done it when you first start driving, you do it and you're like, oh, breaking the law. And then gradually what happens is those people get used to breaking the law, and it just becomes normal that 80 miles an hour is the new thing. And some of your members, I can't see them sitting there, but some are probably sitting there going, yeah, that's me. And others are like tutting, probably. There's probably a split in the crowd, which would be quite interesting. So those are three things. And then obviously, as we age, and this is a question, not a judgment, but does our skill and our fitness fade as we age? Probably for some of us, but definitely not for all of us. I've been out with some very, very fit and very, very skillful kind of people that are older than me. But as that does change, or if we've taken time out and then come back, are we able to recognize that and change our planning for that? And if you hit the next button, Jess, it should bring up my to err is human, to forgive is divine. So every human recognize that. So how can we, now we know that every single human, doesn't matter how good we are, is going to make an error in judgment or skill. What can we do? So next slide, please. And that's something called human factors. So human factors is concerned with understanding and managing the capabilities and limitations of people. So we have limitations on ourselves. We're not all superhuman, or none of us are superhuman. So we all make mistakes. We forget things. Our attention span is limited. We overlook key information when making decisions. We choose to ignore it because it might upset our plan for the holidays. We get distracted. We get bored. Hopefully none of you are at the moment. Tired, preoccupied. We mishear and we misunderstand. So it's not just us. It's not just me as an individual. It's also how we interact with each other, how we interact with our technology and our equipment, and how we interact with our systems as well. And that kind of definition comes from the human factors one. Next slide. So if we accept that everyone can make errors, no matter how well trained we are, things up so we don't. And sometimes we can set up systems that help us, but sometimes the system is working against us. And the challenge is to try and make a system that here it calls about error tolerant systems. So things that if we make a mistake, if we become human and make a mistake in our system, the system will catch us, or hopefully catch us before we make that mistake. So what can our system be? What's our system going to look like? And hopefully the next slide, everyone sitting there will recognize it, but we're going to look at how we can use it. So hopefully everyone has heard of the Be Avalanche Aware kind of thing. Are people nodding when they see that in the audience? Has everyone seen the Be Avalanche Aware thing? And that is just basically a process of making good decisions. So it's, well, if we move on to the next one, next slide, I'll show the next slide in a bit more detail. So you're taking three things, looking at whether you're looking at you and the people you're with, their experiences are and the skills of people, then looking at the terrain and the landscape, three things together to help us make a decision. And hopefully that's a good informed decision based on those three things. We want to do those three things at three distinct phases. So the planning phase, when we are sitting at home in a comfort of our armchair and we go, oh, next weekend, there's nothing in my diary and my pal's off and let's go and have an adventure. Then hopefully you think about those things. The Be Avalanche Aware system is great for avalanches, but people have very much started using this for all adventures. So we can use it in summer hill walking as much as anything else, because it's the process of collecting information, thinking about certain things, and then applying that to make a good decision. So how's that going to look? So the first phase, planning and avoiding the anchor bias. So I suppose I should explain what the anchor bias is. So anchor bias occurs when people rely too much on pre-existing or the first information they find when making a decision. So experience, I've definitely done this before. I have met lots of people who've done it. I've rescued numerous why they're doing what they're doing, and it's all gone is because they sat at home and went, oh, I want to do X route or climb this hill next weekend, and they set their mind on it. And then at some point, if we're lucky, they will then look at the weather forecast. But what they've done is they set their mind on something and then made everything try and fit into that. So you need to do things in the right order. So in the planning, when we're looking at planning, the first thing was forecasts. So I've put avalanche down there as well, avalanche forecast, but it doesn't have to be. So in summer, you wouldn't check the avalanche forecast, of course, but you need to check at least 2 mountain-specific forecasts. The number of people we rescue who check the forecast and then are quite surprised that the weather at the top of the hill is different to the bottom of the hill. You need to think about, what does it mean for me and those I'm with, the wind speed and direction, visibility, precipitation and the temperature, and obviously the avalanche forecast. Where are my no-go areas on the hill? So before I've decided which route I'm going on the hill, I might decide I'm going to Glencoe or to Cairngorms or to the Arrochar Alps. But I look at that information. I haven't decided which hill necessarily, but I'm just going to look at that information and go, okay, with that wind and the precipitation, those temperatures, and with I'm going to choose areas of the mountain that I don't want to a lot of hazard, and then that will allow me to kind of hone that information then, or which mountain might be good. So don't decide on where you're going until you've looked at those things to stop the anchoring forecast, that thing. So the next slide here is an example of that. So I know a lot of people do, and it's a great resource, which is the Walk Highlands. So I just pulled that up, and if I want to do the book a little more, then Walk Highlands was suggested. I go up there and up the Cairngorm, and then go up to the summit, and then along to the other summit, and then down this little corrie here, and then along there. Now, if I look at that first, I might be like, brilliant, that's my route, and all the hard work's done for me. And then I go, oh, right, I suppose I better look at the weather forecast and the avalanche forecast. So if Jess presses the button, if I'm presented with these two avalanche forecasts, obviously one is better than the other. So one is showing the north through to east aspect of 850 meters. Now, that is a depth around 849 meters and be fine, and then step over to 850 and suddenly big thing. But the top of the Cairngorm is pretty much bang on 850 meters. And that particular forecast that I got that from talks about the top of corrie rims and things. So if I was new to this and I took the Walk Highlands thing and then looked at the avalanche forecast, I'd be very much finding it very difficult to think about any other way without going through that avalanche terrain there. Or I will just ignore it and just think, well, I'll do it anyway because that's where Walk Highlands tells me to go, so it must be okay. Yeah. The other forecast on the right-hand side is 1,000 meters. So I could do that because the top is only 1,022 meters, and which theoretically I'll be able to walk all the way up there to the summit and not be in those aspects of that altitude. So you do need to kind of do that before looking at Walk Highlands, for instance. Yeah, so great planning tool, but just do it in the right order. Next one. Planning So, what are your skills, experience, fitness, aspirations, motivations? That all makes a difference. What equipment do you have? Do you have the ability to use that equipment? So, we meet people who are carrying their ice axe and their crampons, but they don't really have the skills to use them. They're just taking them because they've read somewhere that you're supposed to take crampons with you when you go in winter, but they've maybe not used them, or they haven't used them for that season. Are you able to use a range of equipment and skills? So, can you use a map and compass if your phone or GPS stops working? Or, another way of putting it, maybe you're an avid map reader and you can't stand the thought of people using your a phone to navigate. Well, sometimes our navigation fails us, and sometimes the quickest and best way of finding out where you are is actually just to whip out your phone, press the little button, and a little red circle appears where you are. And both are absolutely fine, and both can be really, really useful. But if you use one, can you use the other? Yeah. So if your phone gives way, can you use a map and compass to get you off the hill? If you're a map and compass person and that starts failing, can you use your phone to navigate, or a GPS to navigate? So that, and also something else that how resilient are do got start going wrong? Can you get yourself off the hill, or kind of deal with it yourself? And the final thing is, so you've looked at the weather and the avalanche forecast, you're thinking about yourself, and then finally you look at the landscape. So the Ochils, for instance, which is the picture on the left, poses a lot less challenge to the complex terrain of the Coolin Ridge, which we've got on the right-hand side here. Yeah. So if we're faced with horrible weather, or my fitness isn't right, or my pal isn't thinking properly because they've just had some bad news, and choosing some simple terrain will keep that margin for error much greater. Because if I'm not very good at map reading, or I've forgotten my map and compass, and we've only got one between us, and my pal's not great at it, then getting lost in the Ochils is a lot easier to find your way out of than getting lost on the Coolins, which create all sorts of different things. And what we can do with the terrain as well is we and having different options. So plan A, plan B, plan C, etc. Or I'm just not feeling the love for this today. I've got a really bad chest infection. Should we just go to the cafe? Going to the cafe is absolutely the right decision sometimes. And it's definitely not a failure to go to the cafe, have a cup of tea, and dream about what you were going to do. I've done that on occasions, and it's quite pleasant. Next one, I've got a bit of a challenge for you. So I can't see you, unfortunately, in the audience there, but which type of planner are you? I've got some examples of planning, and I've definitely done both, I'm going to admit. So on the left-hand side in green is probably the correct way, but we've definitely are going to suggest all fallen for the right-hand side on occasion. So I'm off tomorrow. Do you want to get out on the hill for an adventure? So I'm not making any plans or any promises. I'm just saying, let's see if we can go on the hill and have some fun. And that might be 20 meters from the car park, get blown around for an hour, practicing navigation, and run away. Yeah, and on the other side, the anchoring effect, which is instantly, I've set my heart on something, regardless of all other things. My last Monroe, regardless of the weather. On the left, before I make any plans, I'm checking the weather forecast, I'm checking the avalanche forecast if it's winter, thinking about me and the people I'm going with. So what skills, fitness, and things like that. What's my partner's bringing to the table or not? And then I'm looking at options. On the other side, a bit of it's the Alahiga. You've always fancied it. So talking to my pal and press the button, your pal kind of goes, yeah, but it's a bit windy and a bit wet, isn't it? And those who know the Alahiga, you kind of want to avoid it. It gets really slippy in the wet. And because it's a sort of quite a tight ridge, you want to be not on it in the wind. But you kind of ignore that and you go straight to, my mate did it in the same conditions last week and said it was fine. Anyway, Steve said he'll join us too. He's done it before. So straight away, I'm adding to the problem because I'm not wanting to think about the problems. I'm just going, well, we can fix that problem because Steve made the decision. He's the experience. We call that expert halo. When we look up to someone and we good decisions for us, it's called expert halo. And on the other side, we've come up with a plan. I'm feeling good and my pal's feeling good, then we're going to go plan A. And it just presses the next button. But we've already planned, it's already written down in our heads or on a bit of paper, if something's not quite right, and that might be, I woke up this morning and I don't feel very well, or didn't sleep very well, or the weather's different because it's a forecast. It's not going to be necessarily true. It's just what they're expecting. We've all been out in the hills and the weather forecast's been different, either better or worse. So that might change our plan. And if things really, really aren't going to plan, then I've got plan C, plan D, plan E, etc. Whereas on the right-hand side in red, we've got plan A. And plan A is happening regardless of all the other stuff that we've mentioned, people, places, weather forecasts, how we're feeling, the skills we've got. And that is basically, if just presses the button, we're basically rolling a dice. Yeah. We're going into that casino and we're putting our life savings on the table before we've even decided what the odds are. We're planning, we're going into the casino and we're betting our chance, but we don't know what the odds are. And for some people, they might enjoy that side, but probably. But we're not doing it because we like that betting. I suspect some of us might do, but I certainly don't. I like to know what the game I'm playing, and I like to use my skills and my knowledge to play the game I want to play rather than just throwing everything into it. Hopefully that makes sense. Jess, do you have anything to add for that bit? No? Next slide, please. Okay. Yeah. So that's all in the planning. Next slide is when we're out and about, we still want to be thinking of our landscape and we want to be thinking about the people and we want to be thinking about the weather and things. The one thing we can absolutely influence, we can't really influence the weather. We just have to change according to the weather. We can't influence the landscape. We might be able to change where on the landscape we do, but we can look at how we interact ourselves and with the people we're with. And I quite like this. And this comes from Mountain Assurance, which is a company, a guiding company from a British mountain guide called James Thatcher. He's developed this kind of way of thinking about human factors and to make people make better decisions when they're out and about having adventures. And words, communication, alter command gradient, situational awareness, and minimize distractions. So communicate, so establish and maintain lines of communication, say what you see. The amount of times I've done it myself and I've been out with others, or you speak to people who have been rescued and each individual kind of knew what was happening, but no one voiced up. No one said, oh, I'm not sure this is a great idea. Yeah. Or, oh, it looks like there's a bit of avalanche debris over there, but I'll not say anything because I'm with my pal and they're more experienced. But actually that person didn't see it because they're concentrating on something else. Yeah. So say what you see, get it out in the open, make sure everyone's communicating at all times. Alter command gradient, so flatten hierarchy. So again, this expert halo where we just go out with a friend, they're way more experienced. We think they've seen something, we think they're making good decisions. And then suddenly we start thinking, maybe they're not, or you want to question it, but you don't want to question it. So if you are seen, or you think you might be seen as the expert, questions, oh, is everyone okay with this? This is what I'm thinking, you know? Do we all still think this is a good idea, or go with plan B? How's everyone feeling? So don't just put the pressure on the one person or take that pressure. Change it up a little, try and flatten that hierarchy. Situational awareness is the next one. So strive to achieve a shared mental model. Anticipate what happens next. So is everyone aware that there is a plan A, but that there is also a plan B and a plan C, and also aware of what that plan B and C might look like, you know? Or did one person plan the route, plan everything, and then just invite everyone along? In which case, only one person really knows what's happening, and then it gets harder for people to question it. So you're not going to get that gradient things, and people can't add things that have been missed. Again, going back to it, we're all human. So the best person in the world can still make mistakes, can still miss things, they can still have a bad day. And then the final thing, which is minimize distractions. So focus on the task and decision that enhances safety. That's really easy to do when we're going across the Anahiga and we've got 100, 200 meter drops on either side of us. I'm pretty sure everyone in the group will be concentrating on their next step. But quite often what happens is when on time, people get distracted, kind of a bit blasé, and they stop. Might start getting phone calls from work or from family. But also on the way down the hill, you've done all the hard stuff. It looks like the danger's out. And we know from our statistics we saw earlier from Jess, is that a lot of mountain rescue accidents, not necessarily fatalities, but certainly the accidents are people coming off the hill, they're on the path, they're on the grass, and then they go over on their ankle. And it's probably because they've gone, ooh, I can relax now, and they start thinking about the next thing. If you look at car accidents, most car accidents happen statistically within 2 or 3 miles of the home, because as people approach their home, they're no longer concentrating on driving and what's around them. They're starting thinking about the next step, which is when I get in, I need to put the dinner on, or I need to deal with the kids, or I need to answer those emails I've been ignoring. And their brain stops thinking about what the here and now and starts thinking about the next step. So I think this chasm thing might be quite a useful tool for when we're out and about and at key places. Yeah, so on our journey, and also at critical points where do I go up the gully or do I go up the chasm to discuss it as a group? Excellent. We're at Benellochen. So this is in the Arica Alps, Benellochen. Obviously, there's a few Benellochens. So this is at the top of the Rest and Be Thankful. And in winter, it becomes a bit of a tragic place. So those who know the Rest and Be Thankful, it's that place that gets closed every time there's a landslide and you can't get to it, and you have to do a 150-mile round trip to try and get around it. So it's only 901 meters high, so it's not a Munro. But at 750 meters, there is what in the mountain rescue team, nowhere else, but just in Arica Mountain Rescue Team, we call the bad step. And the reason why we call it the bad step is because in recent history, so in the last 20, 30 years, there's been 7 or 8 call-outs. And the mountain itself has had much more, but at this one particular bit, which is probably about 50 meters in length, it's resulted in about 7 or 8 call-outs. Non-fatal, so only 2 people survived it, but they survived. So this wasn't like they survived only with a scrape. They were extremely, and it was just down to luck. And actually, one time I was managing the rescue. We'd been called out. This person, we realized where they were. The helicopter came in, and I was in the control vehicle, and the helicopter came in, picked the casualty up, and flew away. And I thought that was it done. And then I got a call on the radio from the people on the hill, the team members on the hill, saying, "Oh, why has a helicopter gone away?" And I said, "Because they've got the casualty." What transpired, it took a wee while to work out. And luckily, there was a slight difference, was there were actually 2 people that had fallen down the same spot, but were a little bit apart. And the helicopter had picked up one casualty that we didn't know about, and the casualty we were with was the one we knew about. So the helicopter took one casualty away. So I phoned up the helicopter, radioed through to the helicopter and said, "Can you confirm you've got the casualty?" And they're like, "Yeah, we've definitely got the casualty. We're flying them to the hospital." I was like, "Brilliant." And I got back to the mountain rescue team. "Definitely got a casualty." "Yes, they're in front of us and they need a helicopter rapidly." "What do they look like?" And they explained it was a male, and they were fairly battered and broken. And they're a female, and as soon as I said male, female, we realised there were 2 casualties, but we didn't know about it at the time. And it happens mainly it happens in winter at certain conditions when most of the ridge is snow and ice free, apart from this one section where the wind comes across and it collects snow and ice. And so we can walk up this ridge, which is the main way up and down. You wouldn't really do it any other way. And then there's this 500 meter, or sorry, about 50 meters, 100 meters of distance that's snowy or icy. And what people do is they get up to there and they go, oh, I can't be bothered to put my crampons on. I'll just hop across. And they go across, and not always, but often they get across fine. They go to the top, they turn around, they come down. And it's when they come down that they go, oh, should I put my crampons on? No, I'll just go across it because I got away with it last time. So that's our normalizing of deviance, I would call that. Yeah. So I'll just pop across. And it's a bit of lazy to do something, but it's just for that little section. And actually, one of the shouts, we discovered where they were because we followed where they'd done an ice axe arrest. And the problem is you slide down, the path crosses this snowy bit, and it's at a slight side angle, and then it goes straight into a gully, about 50 meters of gully, and then it ends up in rocks. And if we know that it's been in those conditions in winter, we pretty much now send someone straight to those boulders at the bottom. And unfortunately, that's quite a sort of effective way of finding these people. Now, this slide here is no crampons on Ben Lochan, and it's a near miss report that's been given to Mountaineering Scotland. This didn't result in a mountain rescue call out, but I definitely recommend going and reading it at some point. It's a little story, a great story from the person who it happened to, who pretty much sums up what I've just said. But they got away with it. They slipped and they did an ice axe arrest, and they talk about being close to the gully. But luckily they got away with it and they walked away. So the question is, how many more people have had their lucky escape on this bad step? And what do we do about it? We've talked about it. We could go along and put a fence. I'm pretty sure the people sitting in your route do not want to start seeing fences next to scary go in the hills. We want people to make good decisions. So how do we advertise that that is a known kind of bad step in effect? Yeah. Well, what we need to do is we need to look at near misses. And I've got one more slide, which is top tips on staying safe. Thank you very much, everyone. We're almost there. Hopefully it's been useful. So top tips on staying safe. There's millions more we could have added, but we've kind of summarized what we were focusing on, which is good planning in the correct order. So not deciding where we're going first, looking at the information, thinking about us, thinking about the landscape. Having multiple plans throughout, thought about, and keep it flexible, making sure you share those with the people in your group. Awareness of our own personal traits. Are you the type of person who's a bit of a gambler and kind of a bit lazy with planning? Yeah. Maybe recognizing that, and when it's a bit more serious, actually going through that system, that Be Avalanche Aware system, even in summer. Concentration on the ascent and descent. It's not just this. People actually, more accidents happen on the not so scary bits when we're relaxed. So the chasm method over there, which is communicate, alter command gradient, situate group as we're going along. Be realistic with our current skill levels and fitness. It changes from day to day, month to month. If we've taken some time out, these things change. Be aware of that. Have a realistic plan. And then finally, if it goes wrong, have we planned our strategy to deal with that? Can we deal with it ourselves? Do we need to phone mountain rescue? Mountain rescue don't mind being called out and then half an hour later, being phoned again saying, oh, they've got themselves out. What we don't like is getting to tea time and then being phoned out just as you're sitting down, about to eat. And then someone's been sitting there umming and ahhing, going, oh, I don't know, shall I call them out? And then calling us at 7, 8 o'clock, or even worse, 10 o'clock at night. And you have to do it. And you think, if only they'd phoned us at 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock, we could have had this dealt with and be back home. So don't be scared, because you can always phone, just like an ambulance, you can phone us back and say, oh, the clouds disappeared and I can see where we are. Thank you very much. We don't mind that. Okay, so final slide. Promise you, it's the final slide. Learn from the mistakes of others. You can't live long enough to make them all yourself. Yeah, I have made lots and lots of mistakes. Looking back at some of the things I did as a student in my 20s, I'm surprised I am. Judge people that we go and rescue, because I've made pretty much every mistake. But what I am in a position now, and I'm not saying I will never have another accident or a near miss, but I'm much more aware of them because due to my work, I read a lot of other people's mistakes and I learn from their mistakes. So what we have is the BMC near miss reporting thing, which is on that website, the bmc.co.uk, modules instant reporting. Mountaineering Scotland are in the process of, and hopefully that'll happen this month, are in the process of being able to feed. So you'll be able to go onto the Mountaineering Scotland website and fill out one of our forms, and that will feed into the same data set. And we'll be able to get access to that data set, because there's a realization that people come up from England and Wales or Ireland and come to Scotland to have incidents, and they might be recording their incidents and the BMC, and therefore we don't hear about them, and vice versa. People from Scotland have incidents in England and Wales. So what we've decided, we've all got together and said, let's have one big pot we can put all the information in, and we can record it, and then Scotland will be able to draw if we want to, and England and Wales will be able to do the same there. So we're going to be one big happy family and put it all in, but still keep it relevant to the country if they want. But also, rescue statistics only show us and when people needed rescuing, and they only show us from the perspective of the mountain rescue team. They don't tell us anything about the person that needed rescuing or the people that needed rescuing and what they think led up to it. So we have no idea. It's what the mountain rescue teams are projecting onto the casualty, not what the casualty actually thinks led up to it. So myself and a few other people in the mountain safety group got together and we produced this survey. So if you've ever been rescued by a mountain rescue team or by fellow mountaineers, maybe someone helped you off the hill, going back as far as you like in history, then we'd really appreciate you filling out that survey monkey, because what we're doing is we're collecting the stories from those that have been rescued rather than from mountain rescue teams, and to see if we can gain any insight into what's actually causing the accidents rather than just post-incident about what the weather was and whether we're male or female. So please spread the word. That's across the UK as well. So if you had your accident in England while you were living in England and you've moved up to Scotland since, it doesn't really matter. Or maybe you visited Wales and you had a climbing accident and you got rescued. Please feel free to fill out the survey. Please share the survey. It'd be really much appreciated. Thank you very much. Press the button. We've got any questions. Than we thought. Just a bit. And you're on.
I shouldn't be muted, so I'm hoping you're hearing me. I think we have rather overrun.
Sorry.
No, it was full of information. I was really quite impressed with the thought that I had now reached the age where the risk of accidents was lower. But actually, I think I had to reassess that with the next bit when you started telling us about, age and decrepitude has a big impact. So
your words, not mine.
So anyway, everybody here will be lucky, I think is the word for it, to get a copy of the slides from you. So I will email that out on the club Google group. And if anybody's here who's not on the Google group, perhaps they could find somebody or join the Google group and you'll get that, because there's a lot of really good information, which was probably a little bit small, the detail on the screen here. I could see it beautifully, but probably other people couldn't. So perhaps if we can stop the presentation tonight, and if people have any queries, could we email you, Ross, at the Mountaineering Scotland?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you've got my email address. I'm more than happy to answer any questions because, yeah, totally agree, understand that was quite a long, and there's quite a lot of detail, and maybe the reason why we can't see the audience is someone's snoring away in the background.
Not that I've heard, but then my hearing's selective, so you're probably. But can we thank you very much for the presentation tonight, and we could maybe have a small round of applause here. I'm the only person not applauding because I'm holding the key down so that you can keep hearing me. And this time we have been doing a special donation to the Arrochar Mountain Rescue Team to thank you for your presentation tonight and the time putting it together. So I'm hoping that has got through into your coffers, and if it hasn't, then send me an email and I will wind up the secretary, who is a treasurer, who's promised to do it. So, but he's not here tonight, so we can't ask him.
Just on that, we'd just like to say donation is very much appreciated. So thank you for everyone who's put some money towards that. Yeah, to put to some very good use, hopefully. Yeah,
good. Yes.
You should tell him that you're the first person that will say, "Well, just go to the cafe."
Oh yes, I'm being told by Judy, who's a little bit older than me, that I'm the first person in any group that says, "Well, let's just go to the cafe." So I have a what do you call it? A guide to all cafes in hill areas. So
excellent. You are a very safe person on the mountains then.
Absolutely, but I have got 2 limbs, so I don't know whether that's true. Okay, well, thank you, and Jess, who we're not seeing at the present moment. But thank you both for your presentation and your time out tonight. And we're about to have a cuppa, and hopefully you will too.
Excellent, and hopefully we don't see you in our professional capacity in the Arrochar Alps anytime soon, but maybe on the hill.
I hope.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks for having us. And yeah, thank you as well for the donation. Have a good one. Bye-bye.